Come, spellweavers, reavers, rogues, and men-at-arms, and answer the call of adventure. Pick up your sword, your axe, your spellbook, your bow, your rulebook, and your dice, and join the forces of good in their eternal fight against vile monsters, conspiring min-maxers, horny bards, and blood-soaked murder hobos. Discover the treasure trove of role-playing games here on Rollin' Bones. My name is Ryan Howard, and I shall be your guide. Good evening, Boneheads, and welcome back to Rollin' Bones with Ryan Howard, where we make old school young again. I am your host and king of the Boneheads, Ryan Howard. I am the R in OSR, and joining me this evening is someone you've probably seen on several other shows, most notably on Natural Ones with the Basic Expert. He's also been on The Dutch Oven with Victor Gorchev, and of course he is one of the creator, in fact, of the Chronicles of Aeres. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to Rollin' Bones for the first time, Mr. Greg Lambert. Greg, welcome to Rollin' Bones.
I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad we were able to stream.
It is great to have you. You are a favorite of several people who I admire, and we've been comrades in the Basic Experts Gilded server, where I annoy people with my talk of mayonnaise.
Hellman's for life.
Get off. Leave.
I'm done. I'm canceled. The mayonnaise cancellation has begun.
Don't let Thothamon hear you say that.
Yep.
Anyways, we have kind of an interesting topic tonight. Something that Greg and I have been talking about a little bit. And you guys hear me say at the top of the show that, we make old school young again here. One of my big focuses on Rollin' Bones is I want to present these old school ideas to newer players, to people, to be quite frank, my own age, 27 and younger, who didn't grow up playing those games. And so to kind of discuss some of those ideas tonight, I've got Greg joining me here, who is a creator of some great old school games. So, Greg, thanks for kind of taking on this heady and somewhat difficult topic with me tonight.
No problem. That's basically the whole reason why I got into publishing RPG books in the first place, was to try and tackle this subject without even knowing about the whole landscape of the culture, war, or whatever was going on with D&D. It's just something that we wanted to do. Yeah. So that's where I am today.
Absolutely. So before we get into that, though, we do need to get some background on you. So let's start at the beginning here. How'd you get into role-playing games?
Well, I played Hero Quest and also Dragon Strike and a few other kind of D&D related board games when I was in middle school. But my co-author, who's my best friend for 20 plus years, got me into D&D through AD&D 2nd edition in the late 90s. And we were huge fans of Dragonlance at the time as well. We had huge fans of Dragonlance, massive. And there were a lot of kids who were like that. So we played AD&D all the time. We played it at school. We played it before class, after class, during class, on the bus. We played it at home, after work, whatever. We were huge into it. So in the 90s, AD&D 2nd edition was my thing. And we started out with Dragonlance, but eventually, because I was so obsessed with Tolkien and the Silmarillion, I wanted to make my own world. So I created this world, which I called Aeres, which actually is in the language of the world means ether. It's their word for ether, which is the mystical miasma that empowers magic, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I fleshed that out when I was a teenager. Almost none of the stuff I wrote back then holds up to this day, but a lot of the ideas are still present in the material that I created recently. So we played, and we had a long hiatus for probably from like 2005 to 2020. So like 15 years. We didn't play D&D at all. Had no interest in it. And we got back into it because of 5th edition. Surprisingly. Because my co-author comes to me and is like, hey, have you heard of this new edition? It's similar to 2nd edition. I'm like, how? Well, it's got, it's got the proficiencies, and it's got backgrounds which are similar to kits, and it kind of goes, because we knew about how crappy 4th edition was, and we never played that, but 5th edition drew us back in, and so like, you know what, let's resurrect Aeres, and I kind of want to bring that back, and we started learning about like Kickstarter and stuff like that. So I was like, there's no reason I can't create a book for the world that I made in high school for like a general audience. Like, why not? It's a classic world. I feel like people would enjoy it. So that's what we did.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for all the hate that 5th edition kind of has gotten over the past couple years, if you kind of put yourself back in that 2014 mindset of when, even when it was still called D&D Next, before it was really officially branded 5e, I think a lot of people forget that a lot of 2nd edition era players were drawn back in by 5e because it harkened back, rather than being more of what 3.5 and 4e had turned the game into. It harkened back to specifically something that like Gen X gamers grew up with and remembered. So I think that's something that a lot of people need to remember when looking at kind of the legacy and history of 5e, at least in what Crafty Matt likes to call the D&D Next era.
Right. Me and Victor Gorchev have a hashtag for that. We call it O5R. Mm-hmm. It's like the OSR, but O5, original 5th edition, 2014 edition, when it first came out, before it became ridiculously popular. It has some flaws. The 5th edition system is not perfect by any means, but compared with what we had in the past, like, it was a breath of fresh air, and we had no clue that there was this burgeoning, like, huge 5th edition community of people that were doing live streaming and stuff. We just like, oh, this is a cool game. Let's get back into it. We're very naive when it came to that type of stuff.
Now, the next question that I have for you, just to kick things off here, we do this thing mostly out of love. There's not a lot of money to be found in this. So, we dedicate ourselves and our time to this hobby because we enjoy it so much. And that love comes from fond memories. So, Greg, if you had to pick a fondest RPG memory, what would that be?
Fondest RPG memory probably is going to be a session that we had in our original Aeres campaign in 1998. Now, keep in mind, I was part of the generation of players that we didn't play like what you would expect from 1st edition. We didn't have, hex grids and stuff like that. And not a high level of lethality, although it was still there because it's AD&D. But we had a more of an epic story that was influenced by Tolkien and Dragonlance. The players, my co-author and his buddies, stumbled across an ancient ruin that had many, like, huge statues of famous heroes and gods and mythical characters that had all been turned to stone, and they were all in like these anguished positions, and they were like weeping, and it was really sad. And like, I actually was playing some like really sad music, and like to this day, like when my characters came across that, it like affected them somehow. Like they really, like that really stuck with them over the past like 20 plus years. Like encountering that is not something you would expect to see. Like, just, it's a kind of a connection to the past, and like, holy crap, there was like this whole era of this world that's now forgotten, and it's like it should be remembered, but you can't. And it's like, there's a lot of emotion there. So that was a cool session for us at that time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's something really special when your players actually have some kind of emotional response to the lore of your setting, where they actually feel like something of import is happening rather than just, I don't know who these people are. When they actually form that genuine bond and connection with what you've created, it's one of the most special feelings you can have as a game master.
Yeah, I agree. And that's yeah, I'm friends with tons of OSR people and like tons of people in this kind of like general sphere who might like roll their eyes at that type of thing sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a thing that like it should be embraced. Like as
Yeah.
long as you're not being stupid about it. Like we're not trying to have a therapy session at our table.
Mm-hmm.
We're just like if you can experience like storyline and that level of like intensity, go for it. That's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, last time I was on Natural Ones, we actually talked about this a little bit. There's this tendency in the old school community to be, I mean, I know this word is very loaded nowadays, but it's reactionary. It's this idea
Right.
that, if people are playing stuff like Fate Core and Powered by the Apocalypse and, they're story gamers, for us to put forward something that's better than Fate or better than Powered by the Apocalypse, we have to completely reject all, sense of storytelling or story in games. And that's just nonsense, because I think that's really what hooks a lot of people is this feeling of you are experiencing firsthand, first person, a fantasy novel that is unfolding before you that your choices are affecting.
Right, and that's the way that I DM'd, and that's the way that a lot of tons of people were in the 90s. I mean, the game basically almost developed into that from second edition onward. And you can thank Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman for that.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Salt Lake City or whatever kind of school that they came from, where they kind of invented that type of a traditional like gameplay method where everything was kind of a story driven and there was a reason why there was a vampire in the bottom of the dungeon. It just wasn't there because of a random roll,
Right.
right? It actually had a story behind it and a reason behind it, and and that was presented to the players.
Mm-hmm.
But I can understand why a lot of the old school guys who grew up with OD&D and BX first edition, the game was not really like that. I mean, I'm sure there were some people who played it like that,
Mm-hmm.
but the way it developed kind of moved away from the traditional wargaming sensibilities of D&D, and that kind of rubs some of the old guard in the wrong way. So I totally get it. Like there's two schools of thought there. They're both valid. I just don't think you should lean too heavily towards the extreme of one or the other.
Yeah.
Like D&D, yes, it is a war game, but there are storytelling elements. Even if the players create the story and the world around you, they're still creating some kind of fantasy world that you latch onto. On the other hand, you have the Dragonlance inspired epic narrative, which is what we're used to now and what I played. But if you make it too railroady, if you make it too on the nose in terms of telling the players exactly what they must do, and if they deviate from that, then it's going to fall apart. That doesn't work either. You have to strike a good balance.
Yep. Yeah. This is something. The first time I was on Legion of Myth, I said something pretty similar. Servant of Shiloh has made the same point in the same kind of way. We're playing role playing games. So yes, there's a game, there's rules, there's structure, but there's also role playing and story. It you're looking for some kind of Aristotelian balance here between pure narrative, where you might as well just be sitting around in a circle telling stories around a campfire, and pure gaming, where you might as well be playing a board game or a war
Right.
game. So, not to insult the the more wargaming focused people by comparing what they're doing to board games. But somewhere in the middle lies role playing, and I feel like it's more towards the story side of things.
It does, and the old school ideology is that the players create the story through their actions,
Yeah.
and that makes perfect sense. But there is the traditional gaming method that I mentioned, where I feel like the DM is in control. It goes DM, setting, players. Nowadays, in the weird fifth edition world of Twitch streaming and Roll20 and D&D Beyond and all this VTTs and stuff like that, players are number one, right? Like, but players are override the DM quite frequently. I disagree. I feel like the DM is the arbiter of the setting and what happens in the world. And the players can, of course, make many decisions and influence that, but the DM has the final say, especially if they created the setting.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And another aspect of this is whether you like it or don't like it, I think it's fair to say Critical Role is one, extremely influential on the way that modern gaming is perceived, and two, it's more of a TV show than it is a representation of how the game is played. But what you're seeing is a lot of people are watching this TV show, watching this piece of entertainment, not realizing that this is not how the game is usually played, and coming to the table with this expectation of this is going to be just like we're on a TV show. Essentially, without even realizing that what they're watching is more entertainment than gameplay, actually. So I think one of our challenges in introducing old school play to younger audiences is getting them out of the mindset of you need to be entertaining and getting them into the mindset of you need to be imagining yourself in this scenario, or imagining yourself as this character that you're playing in this scenario, and making it your decisions based on that, rather than trying to make people laugh at the table or anything like that. You have to think about, what would this character do given these circumstances and given the abilities that I have?
Yeah, there's a classic meme, an older meme, where I guess it's from 4chan, I'm not sure, but it shows like what the old gamer imagines when they think of D&D versus the new.
Mm-hmm.
And it has the old Grognard on the left, and like his thought bubble is like Three Hearts and Three Lions and like Tolkien and like all this classic fantasy, and like he's thinking of literature and adventure, and like he's the old Grognar. And then the new guy over there, his thought bubble, he's just as enthusiastic, but his thought bubble is like Critical Role and Stranger Things and all this geeky stuff, where it's like he's about the social experience. He's there at the table to have fun and laugh and be like, oh my god, so random, with his friends about D&D. That's like two different mindsets that it's hard to reconcile those, but it is possible.
Yeah, but I think what we run into, and you may disagree with this, and if you do, I'd love to discuss it with you, but I feel like one is more sustainable than the other. There's only so much mileage that you can get at a table out of how much can we kind of make each other laugh with, stupid hijinks that we're coming up with on the spot. How many times can the whole table kind of, grip their stomachs laughing as they're doubled over when the bard goes, I'm going to try and sleep with the dragon. Whereas if you approach it with kind of that old school, that old style fantasy mindset of I am a hero, or I'm at the very least an adventurer, or
Right.
Someone out for his own profit, trying to survive in this world that otherwise would trample over my corpse. I feel like one creates kind of a more exciting environment than the other, where it's all I think it's the difference between satisfying something internal and satisfying something external, where the external is very finite, but the internal is infinite, and essentially the possibilities are endless as to what could happen if I truly, embody this character that I'm playing.
It's the transcendent versus the transient.
Yeah,
And that sounds very pretentious. I apologize, but like,
don't worry about it. I
if
mentioned
we
Aristotle. You're good.
yeah. So like if we're talking about classic fantasy, right? So what exactly does that mean, and how does it kind of differ from contemporary or modern fantasy? I think that's an important aspect to the discussion. And to me, I think classic fantasy is basically anything that influenced D&D. So prior to 1974, even though Gygax he didn't like Tolkien necessarily, he still used Tolkien's ideas because he knew it would be popular. But classic fantasy is a combination of mythology and history,
Yeah,
first and foremost, that's done in such a way that you, as an audience member, can't differentiate between the two. And Tolkien called that concept verisimilitude, right? He wrote about it frequently, and he rightly claimed that Middle Earth contained such a thing. And but that concept has been around since the Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. So I'm not saying that like modern fantasy like Harry Potter can't have verisimilitude. It
right.
can, but it is more of a classic hallmark of like 20th century like old school fantasy. I think classic fantasy should have one. It should have adventure and danger. Okay, it should have that. So this is where it's difficult to reconcile with what Wizards of the Coast has been doing. Because if you're expecting fantasy, including fantasy games like D&D, to always have adventure, to always have challenge and danger, then what are you doing as a barista in Starbucks? Right?
Yeah,
There's a lot of people have made fun of that. I said that's an old news at this point, like stuff like Strixhaven. But it's still the point is still there. Like it's modern fantasy, modern role playing games are moving away from that in some aspect, especially with Wizards of the Coast. Not all, but yeah, it should have that. It should combine history and mythology. And also, now this is going to be a controversial point on my part, and this is something that I think modern D&D and modern fantasy games lack, and it could be a strong draw for modern people if you can present it in the right way. But it should have some kind of moral lesson, or it should at least imply an adherence to some kind of transcendental value system.
yeah,
So I'm not talking about like necessarily like a specific religion, but I'm talking about storytelling conventions that teach a lesson like the hero's journey, or the idea of good versus evil, technology versus magic and nature, that kind of thing. We're missing that core feeling of like ideology or transcendental morality and fantasy that's been there for hundreds of years. It's totally stripped away in favor of, I don't know, some kind of comic bookish like Avengers style of fantasy that we see now. It's not going to hold up. It's not going to hold the test of time, I don't think.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, what you're seeing in a lot of kind of modern stuff is a combination of that Joss Whedon, James Gunn sense of humor that I'm really just entirely tired of, to the point where I even question why we let those two men dominate so much of entertainment up until this point. But you see that mixed with almost a like a mirror image of like a Kirk Cameron Christian movie, just with everything that would be on the like opposite side of what a Kirk Cameron Christian movie would be preaching, but with the same tone, the same attitude, the same ham-fisted approach of we have to get these ideas across. And that is not transcendental. It's not something that resonates deeply within kind of every human being. So I get what you're saying. We need stories in our role playing games that call upon these universal themes that can be seen in all of the best stories, be they ancient or modern. And I think you mentioned some great examples there.
Yeah, I mean there is some classical fantasy that doesn't do verisimilitude very well. Like C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia. He has the ideology there that is what he believes is, going to be transcendent, but Tolkien frequently commented about C.S. Lewis's work. He just shoehorns in stuff and it just seems so random. And, from time to time, it just doesn't serve like the strength of his world building. So that's an example, I think, where like the core verisimilitude of classic fantasy doesn't hold up.
Mm-hmm.
But compared to modern work, the fact that he does have at least an attempt to include ancient mythology and fairy tale and these stories in his work, along with an ideological underpinning, makes it superior to what we see today in like something that Wizards of the Coast would make.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that probably, and a lot of people might agree with me or disagree, but contemporary modern fantasy is probably best exemplified by Harry Potter. That started the whole movement and like this, I guess, kind of very modern fantasy, which is, in some ways, it's Narnia-esque. But Harry Potter takes the tropes of getting objects and characters from mythology, but it doesn't have that moral underpinning. Like,
Right.
yes, it's like, it's like, okay, Harry Potter, there's some good versus evil there, that's sure, but it doesn't have that resonance. It doesn't have like an ancient, like transcendental, like feeling to it that like makes you feel like, okay, this is something more important than myself.
Mm.
And that's what C.S. Lewis and Tolkien have that something like Harry Potter doesn't have.
Yeah.
Now, how does this relate to role-playing games? So role-playing games are just a game. Like, you are playing a game. But when you're playing, like, a fantasy game, some of those concepts I think, must be in the background in order for you to really get into it and understand, like, what you're doing. Like, you're not just playing a dwarf because he's funny and has a funny accent. A dwarf is like something that means something transcendental to humanity.
Yeah.
He has essential elements that you might not want to play if you're a human being, but as a dwarf, you can live that out. He's greedy. He's stubborn. He's harsh. He's looking for gold and treasure. He lives under the mountain. This is all stuff from hundreds, thousands of years ago. So it's like, that's where fantasy role playing has an advantage in being able to teach players at the table about our history, about our mythology, about, what makes us human, basically. Again, that sounds pretentious, but it is true. Yeah, it's not supposed to be as superficial as what modern gamers seem to think that it is.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of these trappings that are just built into what each of these fantasy archetypes are that people have just forgotten about. And so I think one of the ways that we need to approach fantasy moving forward is to really reconnect with the philosophical roots of a lot of these things. So, like you mentioned, dwarves. I see dwarves, elves, and humans as existing in a continuum or on a spectrum with each other, where dwarves are, if you want to get pretentious, let's get pretentious here. Dwarves are the toad in the swamp, as Soren Kierkegaard would describe them. They're grounded. They're they are close to the earth physically and, spiritually, essentially. They are grounded in reality, grounded in things of the earth. Then you have the elves, who seem to be far beyond everything and, so far above and off in their own world, aloof to everything that's going on in reality. But then you have humans, who are what Kierkegaard would call the knight of faith, who are able to leap from the earth to the things that are above the earth and exist in both places simultaneously. You don't have to read Fear and Trembling and understand everything that that book has to say to understand that. But what it comes down to is I feel like that's baked into the dichotomy, or not dichotomy, because there's more than two, but, you know, the thing that humans, elves, and dwarves relate to each other with, that relationship that all three of those main races have with each other, I feel like comes from that particular paradigm.
Right, I agree. And then you have the Conan-esque, the Ubermensch.
Yeah.
Which is, it's. I hate to compare Conan to Nietzsche's Ubermensch because that's very nuanced, and I don't know everything about it. But still, Conan has the will to power. He's there to conquer. He's there to live. He's there to love. You know, he takes the world by his own hand, and he's not narcissistic. He's just a force of nature, basically.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of different aspects to classic fantasy that can be applied at the gaming table, and I feel like if you introduce like some of those concepts to modern players, like they're gonna latch onto it and be like, oh shit, that seems like kind of cool, like, you know, because modern players, like, let's be honest, I'm gonna rant a little bit here now. Bear with me here.
All good.
So there is a stereotype of the 5th edition player in general, among like the old school guys like us, even though you're not necessarily that old, but 5th edition players are tourists. They just want to have that social experience like we talked about earlier with, you know, Stranger Things, Critical Role. They want to be baristas in coffee shops. I feel like there is a small niche of that, especially with the live streamers and the people that have like these well-produced, like, TV shows that they go on Twitch and they pretend like they're Critical Role. Sure, that's true with them, but 95%, I would say maybe even more than 95% of actual 5th edition D&D players in your local game store, at conventions, creating characters and making adventures, they're not like that. They want adventure. They like fantasy. Like, you know, they grew up with the Lord of the Rings movies, the originals, the classics. Like, that's how they were introduced to fantasy. So they love that. They like Game of Thrones. You know, Game of Thrones is flawed. It's not necessarily classic fantasy, I don't think. But it's still like old school type of, very gritty OSR related fantasy. Like, so they're not alien to those concepts. Like, they can be shown maybe through other systems besides 5e. Like, hey, this 5e is awesome. Like, you're enjoying it, but check out the old school stuff. Look at this. Like, if you like Lord of the Rings, if you like Game of Thrones and Conan the Barbarian, this is a better system for that. And you can show them like OSE, or you can show them Castles and Crusades and explain like, look, 5e, it's impossible for you to die. You're like a superhero. You're Superman or you're Wolverine. In this, if you go back, it's actually closer to the stuff that you like. Mm-hmm. You can kind of appeal to their sense of like taste and be like, oh shit, you're right. Like, this is kind of cool. Like, you can show it to them pretty easily. I feel like I don't think that 5e players are necessarily like a lost cause. Like, they're open to different interpretations of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to further illustrate your point, if they actually did enjoy being baristas or being, magical school children, or whatever stereotype we want to port onto them, the average campaign length would be greater than 6 sessions, because they'd be having fun, and they'd still be the fact that campaigns end between like 3 to 6 sessions shows they're not getting what they think they're gonna get out of it. And so what we need is people who are willing to actually show these kind of lost gamers who aren't getting what they were hoping to get out of 5th edition, that there's something that's a little bit stickier here. There's something that will scratch that itch. There's something that will appeal to what you're looking for and maybe don't even know that you're looking for. We just have to be, I think honestly, we have to be gracious enough to say, look, I understand that you're used to a certain style of play. This isn't that, but let me show you what this is. And so rather than saying, you stupid kids and your stupid game, you're saying, let me show you my game. Let me show you what my friends and I have been playing for 10, 20, 25, 35, 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way we're going to get people.
Exactly. At my local game store, which is Level Up Games here in Athens, Georgia, they have 30 or 40 role players, like, almost every day at tables playing D&D. Mm-hmm. But people have come in and said, hey, you guys, do you want to try this game? And they'll hold up, like, Mothership, right? And so, okay. And people will be playing Mothership, and they'll be playing Morkborg, which, Morkborg is its own thing, but it's like, that's very different from 5th edition for sure. Like, they'll be playing Root, which is a board game, but still it has, like, some role-playing aspects to it, or Humblewood. Like, my book is being carried in there. Like, they have copies of it, so, like, they're open to it. They're like, yeah, let's check it out. Especially with the nonsense that Wizards of the Coast has been doing. Like, I don't think, like, average players know what's going on. Like, they see some shady stuff going on. They're like, eh. Like, they just are kind of soured on the 5th edition thing after what WotC's been doing. But I think we should address some comments in the chat. You want to take a look at that?
Yeah, and to start off with chat, Luau Lu here from Dandelion Games mentions that in his experience, rarely does anyone play a more old-school adventure through a more basic rule set without coming away a convert. He says he's seen it a million times. I've experienced it myself in my own gaming, so I feel like it really is just a matter of, okay, we know that you have played this way before. I want you to sit down for a little bit, and we're going to show you how to play this way.
Yeah, exactly. And even if they were introduced to fantasy through different means, like a younger audience, Victor Gorchev says, at least Hogwarts has dangers and mysteries.
Yeah.
This is true. In Hogwarts, there are coffee shop workers, but that's not, that's not the Chamber of Secrets. The Chamber of Secrets is essentially a dungeon crawl.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there is something there, even if it's not connected to an older ideology or a sense of, like, mythology or history. There is still something there. Like, it's not completely devoid of that. At the very beginning of our chat, Crafty Matt said, what is Greg going to do with the OSR, or are you going to be going with the new system? I did want to address that. The answer is yes. We are moving to Castles and Crusades.
Excellent.
And our next book is going to be Castles and Crusades, which is our Wilderkin book, and I'm going to do our first book completely converted to it. That's going to take a long time, though, like a whole year probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually saving that one for kind of the end conversation. But yeah, I mean, that is an excellent point to be brought up with anyone who comes on here, with the way that this OGL situation has unfolded. It's almost a question of, people who are building games and systems that lean heavily on, needing the OGL, especially people like Victor Gorchev, who are very committed to that O5R mindset you mentioned. At this point, what do you do? What direction are you going in? I know Victor's making his own system, but I think Castles and Crusades will be a great alternative for especially stuff like Chronicles of Aeres that kind of strive to be more on the heroic side of classic fantasy.
Right. And so, like, going back to the topic of how do you how do you introduce old school gaming to a modern generation? Talked about appealing to their sensibilities. Hey man, you've seen Lord of the Rings, you've seen Game of Thrones, you know what it's supposed to be,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can go that route, or you can just flat out, if you feel like not everyone's going to respond to that, because not everyone, a lot of gamers are just there for the rules. Like there's a lot of rules nerds out there who just are like into the crunch. Like, and if you can pull out an OSE book or a basic fantasy and be like, hey, look, like open it up and point out, hey, check this out. Like, this is how basic fantasy does racist class. Like, isn't that like interesting? And like show it to them.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be like, hey, I might want to check that out. You don't necessarily have to go from the highfalutin, ideological standpoint that I've been talking about, where it's like, oh, the old school fantasy is better because of transcendent values or whatever. Like, you can just
Yep.
strictly go for the rules and be like, hey, man, like, racist class and OSE, like, here's why it's awesome. It,
Mm-hmm.
it, it gives you a lot of more role playing opportunities. It can actually lead to better like flexibility in some instances, because then your party has a more diverse composition. Like not everyone is a spellcaster.
Yep.
So, in fifth edition, that has like this infamous reputation for having everyone is some kind of spellcaster. Everyone has magic.
Yep.
But if you go to old school, that's not the case. Like the rogue is the rogue or the thief is really a thief. Like he really like delves into that role, and it makes you feel like you're having a better impact at the table. If you can explain that to like some of the newer players who are into 5e, they're probably going to get it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I would not recommend immediately, as soon as someone asks about old school gaming, or as soon as you're trying to pitch someone on old school gaming, be like, well, have you read Kierkegaard?
Yeah, we're not going to do that. We're just talking about, old school like fantasy in general, like the fantasy genre and what it means and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think the best way to describe it to prospective gamers who have never tried the game in that way is to say, look, this is going to be an adventure where most things out there are hostile, most things want you dead, and it's going to be very easy for you to die. But if you survive, then you will become one of the greatest heroes that this realm has ever known. If you are able to overcome all of these obstacles, then the rewards are limitless. And I think that framing of there's high risk, but high reward, that's what's going to hook people in. Whereas, you start off a lot of modern games already pretty powerful. But the journey in becoming, a powerful hero, a powerful warrior, the Luke Skywalker experience, for lack of a better word, going from
Right.
farm boy to Jedi master. I think whether they know it or not, that's something a lot of people are missing, and that aspect of danger of, hey, this could maybe go south really fast, but maybe it could also be awesome. I think that's something that will bring a lot of gamers to the table.
Especially if you look at modern fantasy video games, especially from Software.
Oh yeah.
Dark Soul series, Elden Ring. I don't know a single fifth edition player who hasn't at least played one of those.
Yeah.
Who's in their 20s or 30s. Like, and they know, like, they know that the challenge is there. Like, you can die, but if you don't die, you can get some insane, like, weapon. Like, the reward is there. So, what you were saying is true. It's like, if you get, maybe even explain it to them in the same framework. Like, have you played Elden Ring? Well, this isn't exactly that, but it's got the same feel. You're going to have to think about your decisions. You don't want to always attack and run in. You might want to flee if something looks too strong.
Hmm.
You're going to have to think about your inventory and how to use that wisely. Like,
Yeah.
if you explain like that tabletop experience, they're probably be like, "Oh, that sounds awesome!" Like, and get into it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting how, like, and I know we're going on several shows in a row where I've mentioned this, but things like Berserk are incredibly popular. That is a dark fantasy horror manga. And, stuff like Dark Souls, which Berserk is very influential on, which is a
Right.
very difficult game where essentially the gameplay loop is designed to knock you on your ass until you learn not to get knocked on your ass anymore. That stuff is popular. That stuff appeals to a lot of people. So why can't we reframe this idea of old school gaming in that mold? We don't even have to make it resemble that. It already resembles that. We just have to put that forward. And I think one of the ways that we're going to have to do this, and this might get people throwing stones at me, we might have to drop this whole notion of old school in the branding of it. It is old school, but when you present it as that, you immediately trigger the okay boomer reflex.
Right. Yeah, there's everything that we do is what I would consider old school fantasy.
Right.
Chronicles of Aeres, that picture I have right there, very reminiscent of Redwall. We have animal characters. We're influenced by Redwall, Tolkien, all this type of stuff. That's fine. There's probably a whole generation that's never read Redwall. That's fine. You can introduce it to them if you want. But it's like, when it comes to the actual game mechanics, that's where you want to be like, oh, well, you don't want to be like, oh, you're gonna die. Good luck. Yeah, when you roll level 1, you have 1 hit point. You don't want to introduce it that way and be just like a grognard. That's not going to convince anyone. Like, you have to like build on the strengths of what it is and like the type of gameplay experience that it offers.
Yeah.
Like what you were saying.
Yeah, rather than saying, rather than beginning with, you're going to die, I think you should begin with, how are you going to survive? Because when you frame it as you're going to die, you've essentially already removed this sense that they have any control over their character's fate from their minds. But when you say, how are you going to survive, you've given them a challenge.
Right. And like with my Wilderkin book, like I've discovered with Castles and Crusades, my races actually have more options, which was surprising to me. I thought 5th edition was so complex that I wouldn't be able to do what I wanted to do with Castles and Crusades. But that's the opposite. Like, my Castles and Crusades races have like 7 abilities. Like, they're not like ridiculously powerful, but it just gives you so many different options, like seek hidden passages and look for hidden doors, and you have bonuses to like stealth, and like you can open up 2 books side by side and show the difference to somebody and be like, look at this, like this 5e has this and this, that's cool, but look at this, Castles and Crusades, you have a ton more different options. And like, people love like diversity and options and like character creation options, like stuff like that can really help convince somebody.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to touch on is like, ignore the Twitter people. Like, when we're dealing with like the culture war of the woke versus the conservative OSR people, whatever. I'm part of that, and I'm not going to go too deep into it. But it's like the Twitter sparkle trolls, like the assholes, like they're a lost cause. Forget about them. Like, you're not going to convince them. There's nothing you can say that's going to like make them want to like get into old school fantasy role playing.
Right.
You got to go to your local game store. You have to go to your Discord server. You have to interact with real actual gamers that play the game and that are not there just to complain about some politics. That's how you're going to get converts into the old school way of gaming. Like, you're not going to do it on Twitter. You've got to actually get some boots on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have to... I feel like everyone who wants to kind of spread this old school methodology of gaming, I feel like what you need to do is find your local gaming convention and submit games to run. because then you'll get people who are just curious about, oh, this sounds interesting. This thing that you've written up here on this, this short little entry for conventions. This sounds interesting. Then you get people that you've never interacted with before, who might not be familiar with the ideas that you can then introduce a new style of gaming to. So, that's almost like your mission field, to use a weird analogy, for role playing games. You have to practice this this method of gaming, and you have to practice showing it to people who you've otherwise never interacted with, to make sure that what you're showing them is actually interesting them.
It is kind of annoying to me that we have to even have this discussion.
Yeah.
Like, for a long time, like most of my life, like this would have never been a thing. Like, just the way that RPGs were played and the way D&D was played was just accepted to be a certain way, and everyone thought that was cool. All my friends thought that was awesome. Like, everyone was into old school fantasy and Conan and all the Appendix N stuff and Tolkien. We wanted to play a Tolkien campaign and Dragonlance campaign. Like, why is this even a discussion now? Like, why? Where have we? How far have we fallen? What has happened here?
Yeah. Yeah, and to mention what Max Liao and Brian are talking about here in chat. Twitter is Ender's Game. Twitter is the simulated battles from Ender's Game, and I will stand by that.
Yeah, you're never gonna the or war games.
Yeah,
the only way to win is not to play. Mm-hmm. Although Legion of Myth does say it's fun to mess with them and get trolled and suspended, get reinstated, rinse, repeat. Mm-hmm. That may be fun for some people, but I don't know if I want to do all that. It's not.
Yeah, I mean,
too much.
Well, I can see how Max's tactic there is he doesn't take it seriously, but he knows that other people out there are taking it seriously, and so
that's fun.
He takes great joy in tweaking their noses, which I get it. That I understand.
Yeah. No, it's not real.
Twitter isn't real to real actual people with lives and things that they enjoy, Max, but Twitter is real to some of the saddest people in society. So I fully understand and endorse what you're doing there, Max. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to what I was saying earlier. When you're going to your local game store, and if you bring a stack of basic fantasy books, which are cheap if not free, I think you can get like the softcover for like $5. Sit down at a table and be like, hey, check out this game. Nobody's going to go on Twitter after that session and tweet about how racist you are because you were playing basic. Like, that doesn't happen. Like, it's just, Twitter is just an illusory facade. It's like cast greater illusion 6th level, it's like you have to just forget about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, here's kind of a tactics question that I have for you. What are your thoughts on, well, let's be honest here, what are your thoughts on lying to people? People who come to you and say, I want to play Dungeons and Dragons, or I want to play D&D, and you go, all right, we'll play D&D, and then you're playing something like Dungeon Crawl Classics or OSE. Do you think that's kind of a viable tactic for getting to people just because they know the brand name, but you want to show them a different way?
No, that's not for me. It's not for me. What I would do is be like, all right, cool. This is the latest version. This is 5th edition. Mm-hmm. And maybe we can do like a Mines of Phandelver, or, like a couple of introductory quests. And after you get their feet wet a little bit into what D&D is about, and be like, okay, well, you've seen what 5th edition is about. This is, kind of the newest thing, but a lot of people are moving towards the old stuff. Like, check this out too. If they're into it, they're going to be into it. It just depends on your persuasiveness. But I wouldn't just be like, yes, this is the best. And like, Dungeon Crawl Classics is a harsh mistress. It's like, you don't want to do something like that, like,
Hmm.
because then they're gonna leave the table and go to D&D Beyond and find out that everyone plays 5th edition, and they're just gonna think you're a nerd.
Hmm.
Like, that's just my opinion on it, though.
Yeah. And I mean, I I use a variation of that. I don't lie to people and say, "Yeah, we're playing D&D," and then like have them run something else, but I say, if you want to play D&D, here is something that is similar to D&D. This is what I run at my tables. Um I can certainly show you what the most recent version of D&D is like, or we can play this game and kind of give them the
Yeah,
option there.
yeah, that's a good. Who knows what's gonna happen after one D&D becomes a reality? That's gonna change the whole landscape.
Hmm.
You know, 5th edition might not even exist anymore. Then what are new players gonna do?
Hmm.
Go to the virtual tabletop, I guess.
And apparently, in chat, there's this other game that some people seem to enjoy, like Planet Morning or Celestial Sunrise or something like that. I don't know. Sounds like it's for nerds.
What are they talking about? A Earth Dawn?
Yes.
It's funny because not to get off track, but there's like one of my followers is this Japanese guy, and he's like been my follower forever. He doesn't speak a lick of English, and he plays the hell out of Earth Dawn.
Hmm.
Like I was like translate. I saw some like posts that he made, and it looked kind of cool, like artwork or whatever. And I was like, I did Google Translate. He's talking about Earth Dawn.
Hmm.
He's like a hardcore Earth Dawn guy, and like him and all his Japanese friends play that. I
Hmm.
thought that was real interesting. Like how random. I thought they played Sword World over there.
You must have encountered Max's brother-in-law. I don't even know if Max has a brother-in-law. Anyway, but yeah, I think Crafty kind of backs you up on this. People want to play D&D or play 5e. Trying to turn them away from it before letting them play is not. It's not a good idea. And I agree with you guys on that. Like, if they know what D&D is and they want to play the game with the D, the ampersand, and the D on the cover, then yes, show it to them, run them through it, introduce them to D&D that way. But, and I probably should have reframed this better. People who use the term D&D as a catch-all for I want to play RPGs, or even more broadly than that, and I say this from my own personal experience, I am a fantasy fan and I want to try this role-playing thing that I've heard so much about. And the only word they know for it is D&D. It's like when people talk about mixed martial arts but call it all UFC. That's
Yeah.
what I was referring to. Not someone saying, I bought this 5e book, I want to, figure out what's in here, and you going, no, 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 we're not going to play that. So that's
You
where.
can also like get into always good idea to have a conversation with new players about what are they looking for, like what are they trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So I kind of would just I play a lot of Final Fantasy 14. Is this like that? Well, I mean, it's I mean, there's some elements of that, not really, but there's, you have a party with a fighter and a tank, so there is some elements of that. But if you're looking for the Final Fantasy 14 experience, first of all, just continue playing the video game.
Yeah.
But still, if you want to have that at the table here, this might be a better system. So, that's how you might be able to take that approach.
Mm-hmm.
If you have like somebody who's got fresh, like super green, they've got the 5e books, they just saw Stranger Things. They're like, yeah, this looks cool. I want to get into D&D. But okay, well, what are you looking for? Oh, I want to play it like they do on Stranger Things. Like that's how I saw, like, the Hellfire Club. That's what this is, right? Okay, well, yeah, I mean, there's some elements of that there, but, that took place in the 80s. This is what they're playing in the Hellfire Club. That's when you can pull out your AD&D, first edition, Like Dungeon Master's got to like show them, and they'll be like, like, because they actually use that as a prop in the show.
Yeah.
Like that's a good like segue. Like so, there's a way you can go about it just by kind of figuring out why they're into it, what they're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, and once I actually find the time to make these videos that I've been planning on making, one of the first ones that I'm gonna put out is a video about finding your fantasy. Because finding out what actually makes your imagination go wild is the first step to figuring out what system you're actually going to have fun playing. Because if you don't like westerns, you're not going to enjoy Deadlands or Weird Frontiers. If you don't like super high-powered fantasy where you're essentially a superhero, you're not going to enjoy 5e. If you don't like super low-powered fantasy, you're not going to enjoy, OSE. So it's all about figuring out, like you said, what people are interested in, what's kind of bringing them to ask you, presumably someone knowledgeable about role-playing games, where do we start? How do we get into this D&D thing? So sitting down and figuring out, what books they read, what comics they like, what movies they like, and, what really gets them excited as far as, escapist fiction goes, I think that's a good first step.
I agree, and that it coincides with exactly why I created the Chronicles of Aeres and continuing to put out these books. It's like we're 100% fifth edition up until recently, OpenGL and stuff like that. 100% fifth edition, very overpowered. You're if you roll a Chronicles of Aeres character, it's going to be strong as hell. I made several classes that are custom and stuff like that. But the whole point of it for us was to bring the aesthetic feel, the flavor, the atmosphere, just the overall zeitgeist of old school fantasy to 5th edition. Mm-hmm. And so, something like my books, or like there's some other books out there that fill that niche, like that could be a good choice. Like it's okay to have a 5th edition table that's not in Strixhaven, but you're still running like an old school flavor, like a Tolkien-esque campaign, a Conan Sword and Sorcery adventure. You can do that with 5th edition and have all the bells and whistles. You can have the fantasy music, you can have the old school artwork, influences from all the stuff you grew up with in the 80s and the 70s. That's what we're about. That's what we're there for. We're there for the flavor. If you have the flavor, that is just as good of a first step as if you had cracked open like a first edition AD&D book, That's the whole reason why we did this. Mm-hmm.
And I think that'll serve as a good transition point here to talk specifically about the work that you do. So, you've mentioned Chronicles of Aeres several times. If you were to give someone like an elevator pitch, just to really get them hooked on what they can expect from Chronicles of Aeres, how would you put that to a prospective new player?
Well, it depends on what their background is, but the Chronicles of Aeres is essentially the distillation of all the best old school fantasy that we grew up with as guys in the 80s. We are influenced by Dragonlance, Tolkien, the Chronicles of Narnia, especially Prince Caspian, Redwall, The Secret of Nim, The Dark Crystal, the Conan the Barbarian movies, Willow, The Neverending Story. Like, we've got aspects of all the classic old school fantasy stuff in our setting. But what we've done is we've tweaked and rewritten and molded that into our own vision that's cohesive. It's not completely a kitchen sink where you've got elements. It's not a hodgepodge. It's a cohesive setting that you can have adventures in. So if you want to play as Justin from The Secret of Nim going on a Tolkien-esque adventure, we can have that scenario in Aeres. If you want to play as Conan the Barbarian, going like climbing a tower to capture a treasure from the Skeksis, from the Dark Crystal. That type of scenario, not the exact terminology, of course, that's all copyrighted, but like that feel, that same like idea of old school fantasy, like the mashup, that's what we're about. We satisfy that nostalgia itch. We're all about the super nostalgia, the old school feeling, the warm cockles in your heart that you get when you turn on a VHS tape and like the Conan the Barbarian, like dun 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 dun, that music pops in. Like we're all about the nostalgia. That's what we do.
Now, as far as picking up your specific books, where would you recommend people go? Obviously, you're on Drive Through. You have your own website. You know, what is your personal recommendation for people who are looking to pick up your books?
Right now, we're currently out of our books.
Okay.
I have a lot of our first book, but it's at my co-author's house in his garage. So I actually have to go drive over there and pick up some copies in order to be able to ship it. So that's why our Shopify has zero stock right now. I'll be able to rectify that pretty soon, but if you want to pick us up, Drive Through RPG has all our digital books. We have a bundle that has all three of our adventures for like $12. So it's a really good deal. Like most people would charge like $50 for one of these things, but we've got like the artwork and some of our stuff is going to blow your mind. Like you're not going to pick up like third-party stuff this good with this type of artwork for that price.
Gotcha. Brian, James, and chat, what do you guys think of the Shannara Chronicles? I'll answer first just because my answer is quick. I've never read the books, and I've never seen the show. So I don't think about it.
It's not good. It's like an MTV version of Shannara Chronicles. It's like really poor. But yeah, Brian is all about that Excalibur, the 1981 classic. Love that movie. And that's see, look how excited Brian is about this. He's talking about Excalibur, Conan the Barbarian, Conan the Destroyer. Like that's the type of like excitement that we hope that we can instill in people who open up our books and like go through it and be like, oh, I remember that. Like this is cool. Like this reminds me of like the Dark Crystal. Like that's the type of like vibe I want. Like I want people to like feel like they're like getting back into their childhood with their stuff.
Absolutely. Now, in addition to Chronicles of Aeres, you also have another kind of completely different game in the works that has to do with kaiju. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I have an advertisement for it. I don't know if you can pull that up. If not, that's okay. But it is our next project, which is actually fortuitous because it has nothing to do with the open game license, nothing to do with Wizards of the Coast. We've been working on this for 6 months. Titans of Fallen Earth is the name of the game. And it is a post-apocalyptic, cyberpunk, old school 1980s anime influenced giant monsters versus mecha tabletop role playing game. It's have Mad Max influences, Akira, Neon Genesis Evangelion, like all kinds of stuff from the 80s. It's going to be awesome. You're going to be able to play as a mech pilot. You actually can play as a kaiju giant monster. You can play as a super soldier, a mutant. It's going to have like fast-paced, like high-hitting combat. Combat is going to be the major focus because, you know, it's giant monsters versus mecha. But we're developing our own like D6 system. We're influenced by WEG Star Wars. It's going to be a D6 dice pool system. And we have a ton of artwork and lore already going. We've done some playtesting sessions for combat like early on, and those were successful. So hopefully that will be released this year.
Gotcha. Sounds like it'll be a real hoot for people who are fans of like Kamen Rider or Super Sentai or
yes,
Armor Trooper Bottoms and stuff like that.
Yep. Armor Trooper Bottoms. We have mechs directly influenced by that. We've got all of them. All of my artists are like comic book guys who are super into Godzilla and Kaiju and Kamen Rider, that type of stuff. They all know about it. I don't have anyone here like in our project who doesn't like is not super into it. So it's going to be very authentic to that feel and to that atmosphere of like giant monster stuff. Getter Robo, let's see, Gundam, of course, is an influence on us. It just goes on and on. Even like like random stuff like Super Metroid, like has influenced like some of our designs there. So that's going to be a fun game. And what we want to do with Titans of Fallen Earth is take the core system, which is a D6 system. We're going to do our own like generic version that you can have plugins for fantasy, horror, alternate sci-fi. It's going to be like I don't want to say it's a universal game license because everyone's doing that now, but we will have our own license for that as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I mean, D6 systems, especially if it's inspired by, WEG Star Wars, what you're going to be in for, hopefully, is, fast-paced and very cinematic gameplay. So
Right.
It'll be perfect for kind of replicating those massive, large-scale kaiju battles from all of those, anime and TV series that people love and will be inspired by who want to pick up this game.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have an official website for it just yet because we do have some websites registered for it, but we're working on a live action trailer that we want to release that I hope will go viral. So
Ooh,
I haven't put it up
nice.
yet, but yep, hopefully it'll be awesome. I like rolling 20d6, 30d6. That's what we're aiming for with this thing. You think Godzilla's atomic breath is going to be less than a 20d6? Yeah, no.
Now, is this going to go, like, is this just going to be straight up released, or is this going to go on, like, Kickstarter or something like that?
We're going to do a Kickstarter.
Sweet.
I'm thinking it's going to be around June. I'm getting that kind of feel from where we're at, probably June, July.
Gotcha.
But yeah, this is going to be our next big thing. Totally independent from Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to continue Dungeons and Dragons, or Castles and Crusades, as the case may be. But yeah, this will be our own thing. I hope it succeeds. Anybody who's into Godzilla, Gamera, Ultraman, that type of stuff, even Gundam, Mecha, like if you like that at all and you play RPGs, we're not going to disappoint you.
Absolutely.
And also, we're not going to be super woke, so don't worry about that.
That's good. That's always good. I'm struggling to think of ways that, kaiju and mecha could turn woke, but, if I start questioning how that happens, someone's going to start linking stuff in chat and showing me examples of places where that has happened, and I'm just going to be sad for the rest of the day. So we're just
Well, you know what? It's a modern futuristic setting, right? Influenced by cyberpunk. So obviously, there are things like transhumanism and cyberpunk. There's different like politics and like gender identity stuff could potentially be a part of it, but that's not something that I really care about or that I'm focusing on. I really just want to see giant monsters blow buildings up.
Yeah. Yeah, and you want to launch your rocket fist at Godzilla's jaw.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what life's all about. Now, unfortunately, we are kind of running up against our time here. This has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed talking with you about this, Greg, so we'll have to have you back on again. Once you get closer to the launch of your Kickstarter campaign, let's bring you on, and I'll see if I can bring a couple more people on as well, and we can do a whole kaiju-focused show. We'll see if
Sure.
something like that can be pulled together. I'm sure Levi Combs would want to be in on that one.
That would be great.
So
Tell Levi Combs to follow me on Twitter. He
Absolutely.
currently does not.
Or better yet, what you can, I don't know what your work situation would be like, but if you come to North Texas this year, we can meet up, and I will introduce you to Levi Combs in person if you haven't met him in person already, and we can have that conversation with him together.
Sure, I don't mind. Maybe there will be a convention or something out there I can get out there.
Absolutely. So before we go, there is one final question that you have to answer, because everyone has to answer it when they come on Rollin' Bones. I like to save this one for the end here, but Greg, if you could put anything on a t-shirt, what would it be?
Anything on a t-shirt. God. What would that be? I don't know. I probably, if I, shit, that's a tough question. Is that why you asked that?
Yes.
God damn it.
And the answer can be as philosophical or as sophomoric as you want it to be.
Probably a picture of a Philly cheesesteak sandwich. Because that's like my favorite thing in the world.
Hey, there's nothing better than a good Philly cheesesteak.
Yeah, that's what I want right now.
Man, Nashville is a Philly cheesesteak desert. I'll tell you that for a fact.
I can imagine.
North Carolina, though, not. There is a great place in the Charlotte area to get Philly cheesesteaks. But Nashville, just forget about it.
Forget about it.
Forget about it. Well, guys, unfortunately, that's going to do it for tonight's episode of Rollin' Bones. I wish we could go for another hour here with Greg, because this has been a fantastic conversation. But, like I said, we will get you back on at some point in the not-too-distant future.
I really appreciate you having me on. I'm sorry if we rambled too much about philosophy and stuff like that, but, hopefully some people will get some enjoyment out of the discussion. So hope you have a good one.
Hey, my entirely useless philosophy degree is right over here to my right, so it's nice to actually be able to use that every now and then. So
Nice. All right, thanks again.
No problem. All right, so guys, that like I said, that's going to be it for tonight. To answer Brian James's question here in chat, what's going down in North Texas is, of course, North Texas RPG Convention. That'll be happening towards the end of May, headed into early June of this year in Irving, Texas. I will be there. I will be running games. If you want to get in on a game of Nighthaven, instead of just hearing me kind of vaguely ramble about it like you have for the past couple years, you'll be able to do that in North Texas. You'll also be able to see people like Levi Combs, like Luau Lu here in chat. He's usually there and always great to hang out with, great to be in one of his games. So that'll be a good opportunity to, meet up with me, say hi, meet some great creators, and, play some new games.
Yeah. Real quick, I wanted to throw in, I forgot to mention.
Go for it.
We will be at the Savannah, Georgia Animazing Expo on February 11th. So it runs from February 10th to February 12th. It is an anime gaming, traditional convention. We're going to be selling all of our books there. Look for Dueling Dragon Adventures. We'll have a big banner. So if you're in the Georgia or Southeast area, you want to go to Savannah, a lot of historical stuff you can look at there. We'll be at the Savannah Convention Center.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Savannah is beautiful. So definitely make your way out there. It'll at least be warm for you in February.
Yeah.
And then next week, he is finally going to be coming on the show. You know him, you love him, you've probably either liked all of his tweets or argued with him several times on Twitter, but the one and only Crossface will be joining us next week to discuss an oddly polarizing topic, and that is running games rules as written. So if you want to see me and Crossface talk about running rules as written, and probably a little bit of talk about martial arts and MMA as well, that'll be the show for you this time next Tuesday the 31st. But until then, whether you rolled a 1 or a 20, I'm so glad that you rolled your bones with me, Ryan Howard, and I will see you guys next time.